Hi there, I'm April Callis-Birchmeier, Certified Change Management Professional and Project Management Professional. And I'm excited to be here with you today to talk about from resistance to resilience, mastering the READY framework in your organization. I wrote my book, Ready, Set, Change, a couple of years ago, and I continue to think about how is it that we can help people to be ready to adopt change? How can we help people move through the steps that it takes to really adopt the new world, adopt the future state, and ensure that we do so both in mindset and in behavior? So I'm really focused all the time on how can I help people adopt change? How do I help people adapt to the different types of work, the different business processes that we have, the different system that's going in? And then what can we do when we're encountering resistance? How can we start to build the muscle of resilience in this case? So let's talk a little bit about resistance itself. Resistance, I think sometimes people feel like it's a dirty word, oh no, the resistance is coming. Well, humans resist change. We always will. And so it's important to recognize that resistance is human, resistance is natural, and we will always have it, particularly if we have an organizational change that's difficult or that requires a lot of training. Maybe it requires a lot of business process rework or redesign so that people do things in a different way. All of that will create resistance. There's no getting away from it. I think that when we um, talk about resistance, it can show up in a number of different ways. Resistance can look like, um, somebody who's just angry and fighting, that they just don't want to adopt this change. I think resistance can look like snarky, sarcastic comments where people don't always support the change. Maybe they say the words, oh, yeah, I'm on board with this change, but they give you the eye roll at the same time. Resistance can sometimes show up in ways that are unexpected, like people retire and they just say, I don't feel like going through one more change. Or maybe they do something even worse. They retire, but they stay at work. And that's worse. Sometimes people will pick apart a change. They will try to ask for more detail, more information, and prevent others from going forward. There's a lot of ways that resistance shows up. One of the big ways that I see resistance showing up is asking why. Why do we have to do this? Why is this important to us? Why this product? Why now? Why me? All of that is resistance. And it's okay. It's okay that people are feeling that way. The goal, however, is to help people shift from that frustration and anger and quarrelsomeness, from that cynical, sarcastic perspective, helping them shift in terms of our mindset, in terms of thinking differently about the change, and helping people shift in their behavior is what organizational change management is for. Because if we can help people behave differently and think differently related to the change, and we are able to then implement the change successfully and sustain the change, we've done our jobs. We have been able to do what we needed to do. I was talking with a mentee today, and I was mentioning to her that I found when I think about organizational change management, sometimes I'm thinking about it being preventative. You know, when you go to your doctor's office and they say, hey, everything looks pretty good, but if you lost some weight and you maybe exercised a little bit more and, you ate a little healthier, you probably wouldn't have to take this medication. And that's called preventative care, right? Do these behaviors, adopt these new behaviors, change the way that you do things, change the way you eat, change your routine, and then You've prevented illness, right? You don't have to take the medication because you are practicing a preventative care. Now, it does not always work, believe me. I had the preventative action of exercising. I wanted to ensure that I didn't get breast cancer. I was told I had a high risk, 50% higher than most women, by a doctor that I was seeing. And she said, well, there's not a lot you can do preventatively. Um, but one thing you can do is you can exercise every day. So I got excited about that. And I did start an exercise routine every single day. And it was fantastic for me. It did not totally prevent me from getting breast cancer. I did have breast cancer, and thankfully I'm fully recovered. But it actually did make such a difference in my state of mind and in the way I felt that I've kept up my exercise routine all these years later. And I think it's really important to recognize that initial resistance I had to, I don't want to have to go and do that, actually morphed. And it morphed into being resilient. Even though it didn't completely prevent what I was trying to prevent, it was easier for me to recover because of my routine, because I was more resilient. So when we think about how can we help mitigate resistance, there's a number of things we can do. We can listen. We can empathize. Empathy is a tremendous tool, and we don't always use it at work. Sometimes at work, we feel like we should be sort of tough and not be very focused on listening. And let's face it, there's just some people at work who would have us listen to them nonstop every day, all day. But when somebody has something on their mind, something on their heart that they just need to have somebody else hear. And when we're in the midst of change, it's especially prevalent, and it's part of resistance. And listening and empathizing can be very helpful. I think another way that I like to try to mitigate resistance is always answering the why of the change. Why do we have to do this? Why now? Why me? And that's where I look at that READY framework that I've been talking about, where the R is the relevant and relatable story of the change. When we have the relevant and relatable story of the change, that's answering the why of why now, why me, why do we have to do this? And that can really help go a long way toward mitigating resistance. I'm not going to pretend that it's always effective in mitigation of resistance, but it is really a very helpful tool, because the more I can get the story of the why, the more I can get the story of the change and why this is important and why we have to do this now, the easier it becomes for that resistance to sort of give way, sometimes to resignation, but many times to resilience. And that's where we're headed. So when we're trying to think about the difference between resistance, which is, that resistant push against something, I think very often I think of resistance as a reaction, like if somebody were to come up and push you right now, you'd say, you'd push back. That's resistance. We'd say, no, I don't want to do that. Sometimes even before we think about it. But that resistance is an immediate reaction. No. So when I think about resilience is different. Resilience is a response. So we have the resistance is the action, the reaction, quickly, the reacting. And then resilience is the response. And the response I find to be really helpful because we can choose a response. A reaction is sort of instant, right? And that's how resistance can feel. Just sort of like, I don't want this. But the resilience is a little bit slower. It gives us more time to react or to respond to what we're hearing. It's taking the space to choose the response. A lot of times in my positive workplace workshop that I've been doing for probably 20 years now. One of the quotes that I find so inspiring is from Viktor Frankl. And Viktor Frankl was a German psychiatrist and also found himself in a concentration camp because he was Jewish. And at the concentration camp, he had to stay alive. That was his goal. He wrote a book later called Man's Search for Meaning, and he talks about this struggle to stay alive. And he decided that if he could volunteer for experiments, experiments that the Nazis were performing on the prisoners, that he may be more useful and he might stay alive. And so he did volunteer. And he discovered in this volunteer role that he could choose his response. He didn't have to react the way they wanted him to react. He could choose his response. And in that choice, he writes in Man's Search for Meaning, in that choice lies our growth and our freedom. And I feel that way about choosing the response and becoming resilient when it comes to change. When we choose the response, when we react with resilience, as opposed to just an immediate resistant reaction, we are building the muscle of resilience. And it takes time. There's no shortcut to it. Just as working out doesn't really have a shortcut either. You can go work out really, really hard for one day, and you might come away feeling like, wow, that was fantastic. But your muscles won't be much stronger. You could go back in a year and try again and work out really hard for one day, but you're not any stronger because resilience is like a muscle. It has to be worked over time, again and again and again. And it's the repetitions, it's all of the day after day after day that gives you strength, not the one hard workout a year. And so this thinking about resilience, you're practicing day after day after day, choosing a response, refusing to react, choosing a response. And that response choice is building your resilience muscle. So I think it's really helpful to imagine when I'm going through something that's very stressful, like a change I do not agree with and I do not want to be a part of. I think it's really helpful for me, and it may be helpful for you, and it may be helpful for your stakeholders to try to envision this incremental improvement day by day in our ability to tolerate difficulty and our ability to flex our muscles of resilience and response, and to ensure that we are able to make room in our mind and in our routine to add and shift things. I think I can also help people adapt or break through that resistance by giving them pieces that they can keep. So I don't know if you're familiar with the change curve. If you've been watching me for a while, you probably are. But, we have two lines on our change curve. When we think about a change curve, the moment the change is implemented, our performance dips. And the performance is either going to dip dramatically down and be very low, and then it's going to take a long time to manage to get up to adoption, where we start to realize the benefits of the change. Or our performance dip can be a little bit less deep. It's actually shallow, just a little bit of a dip down, and then a much shorter time window to make it to the point where we adopt the change, where we manage to get to the future state and we start to realize the expected benefits of the change. And when we think about these two lines, right, the shallow line or the very deep, longer line, with the change curve, it reminds me very much of having people have little footholds to hang on to. If you're, I'm not a mountain climber, so I cannot speak to mountain climbing, but I have watched things on TV where, there are handholds and footholds that other climbers have left, and people are using those guidelines. And I feel like it's important with change to also have pieces from others that we can hang on to, pieces from the past that we can hang on to, little stopping points along the way where we can regroup and refresh ourselves, where we can practice some resilience and try to break through the resistance. But that mindset shift and the ability to change our behavior, those are within us. Those are things that we have to do together. I also think about, what if somebody just says, no, I don't want to adopt this change and I'm just going to quit or retire or leave? That's totally fine in the sense that we all have free will. We all have the choice. Now, I might feel as though I don't have the choice because this is my job and it's the only job I have, and this is what I need to do to earn a living. I understand that. It's terrifying. And so maybe you cannot change the job, but in terms of not being able to adopt, but you could perhaps seek a different area, or maybe focus on working with somebody who can coach you through resistance, because we want to ensure that people are making it through this rocky path of resistance. It's difficult. It's not easy. It's emotional. It feels like you're losing something, and you are. You're losing your place, you're losing your routine, you're losing familiarity, you're losing the comfort of knowing what you're doing. And so it is difficult for people to move from this place of fear and resistance into a more resilient and then finally more accepting and adopting mindset and behavior. Some people choose not to do it, and that's totally fine if they choose that. But I think it's imperative that every change management professional empathize and understand that this is a really difficult path, and not everybody is as flexible as others. And so it may be even more difficult for some. It's just it's the way life is. And so helping people, making sure that they know what to do to make it through the rocky path of resistance and to be able to accept what's happening and actually come out on the other side of it where we start to see benefits from the accepted changes. So I think that there's a lot here in thinking about resilience, thinking about resistance, and how we can use the READY framework. As I mentioned, the R is the relevant, relatable story of change. E is for engaging leaders, and our leaders, our sponsors must be engaged with the change, and the sponsors can have such a big impact when it comes to resistance. Our sponsors thinking about resistance, they have the ability to be visible and active and to reach out to managers and supervisors and employees who really are struggling and to guide them, to help them. And it's not easy work. Engagement is difficult and leaders are busy. So ensuring that we can support sponsors so that they are able to do what they need to do to assist the stakeholders and assist end users is so critical because our sponsors want to do a great job. They are overwhelmed with other work, and they are also in need of some guidance and some help and support as they go through change. I think also about then the A for advanced communication and advocacy. Wherever possible, if there is an opportunity to really advocate for the end users, whether it's at a technical meeting or project leadership meeting, and there's maybe sort of the stakeholders may not be forefront in everyone's mind as we're trying to solve a technical issue or a milestone problem. I think it's important to remember that the stakeholders have to be able to easily adopt the technology. We can't make it so difficult for them that it's impossible. I think also the advanced communication to stakeholders really matters. Not all stakeholders want to hear from us a long time. They don't want to hear from us maybe 10 months and our project's going live in 12 months. They don't want to have constant email from us, but they want to know what's going on. They need to know what's happening. And so that advanced communication and talking to them multiple times over multiple months so that they are aware of what's coming. And so they're able to get what they need from the communication. And also so they're able to take that next step, which is the D for develop and support, which is our training plan. Pretty much every single change is going to involve some sort of training or in development. I mean, there's not a change that I can think of that I wouldn't need training on. So I think the training and development and the support that we give our stakeholders and end users as they go live, help desk support, command center support, labs, one-on-one coaching, all of that is so essential to help people with adoption and to break through that resistance piece. And then finally, the why. The why of the ready is the why of the change. Why now? And that why is telling me there is still resistance going on. And I'm going to loop back to my relevant, relatable story of change to talk about the why, to remind people of the why and the story of where we need to go and why we're doing what we're doing. So that's how the Ready framework can really help to mitigate a lot of this change stress and change frustration that happens in projects. So in thinking about what's next, I'm hoping that you're able to take some of these ideas and some of this insight and some of our conversation today and apply it. Even if you just are listening with empathy to somebody's resistance and frustration, even if you are able to help people keep a little part of what's familiar for them while going through the change until they're able to adapt the change and then maybe let go of the familiar comfort piece, whatever it is that you can provide to our stakeholders to help them move from the instant reaction and the resistant reaction into a resilience and into responding differently, that can be extremely helpful for stakeholders, for end users, and for everybody involved in that change. And let me just take a moment to say that if you are heading out to Change Chicago, which is the ACMP Global Conference in Chicago, ACMP Change Chicago. It's an in-person conference. It is sold out, but it's in Chicago this starting on May 18th, and I'm teaching a pre-conference workshop. And if you haven't signed up for it yet, there is still time to join my pre-conference workshop, but I would love to see you there. I'm talking about using storytelling to drive change. So I'm really excited about that workshop. And you can also let me know you're there. I'll give you a t-shirt. Come and see me. I'll be at booth 115 most of the conference. And I'm also having a number of events. And if you come and see me, absolutely, I'll give you a t-shirt. So please stop by booth 115 at the Chicago Hilton and Change Chicago this 18th through 21st. So that's what I wanted to talk about today for our LinkedIn Live is really this move from resistance to resilience and how thinking about that ready framework can really help people to move from that resistance stance and resistance frustration, resistance anger, resistance fear, and start to adopt a change and be more connected to the change and be able to move forward into that change, sustaining it going forward and feeling more comfortable and confident all the time that they are developing those muscles, helping them develop the resilience muscle. So that's it for today. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you in 2 weeks, and I hope to see you at Change Chicago if you're attending. Take care.